Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters. First, we're going to have the long, irrelevant interlude before I actually get into what this is about, which is going to be about the differences between studying in the US and studying in Finland. Yeah, I just keep messing around with different places to record because the desk I have is not actually the desk I use, and I need to throw it out because I've been trying to sell it on Facebook Marketplace and it's just not happening. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting how the things you think you want are often not the things you actually want. I thought having my own place, I would be so happy and stuff. Instead, I honestly, I'm trying to think of how to put this. I feel worse than when I was living with my dad, and I didn't know that was possible. Anyway, so I'm trying to show up for this channel, even though it's incredibly hard. And it's not just because I have a baby, it's because I'm back in America and I don't like being here. So, I always say pick your set of problems, right? Like in Finland, I was taking care of a baby by myself, and here I'm fighting for my freedom because nobody really accepts what I want. So, anyway, all right, so that's the point. There are different sets of challenges in each place, and that's kind of what this video is going to be about. Obviously, I'm telling this from the lens of an American who grew up in the US and studied in the US and then went to Finland. So my experience with that background is going to be different than a Finnish person studying in Finland or than another international person studying in Finland. So some of the basic things that I thought were really weird when I went to go study in Finland had to do with the fact that you get 3 chances to take an exam when you fail the first time. No, that's not how that works in the US. You get 1 chance, man. And if you mess that up, then you have to retake the whole class, which gets to be very expensive. So ideally, you want to pass. So there's a lot more pressure on, needing to actually, pass your classes if you don't want to waste lots of money and be lots of, dollars in debt. And so that's kind of the thing that I think about a lot when I think about, money in the US, is it just feels very like monopoly money because everything is so exorbitantly expensive that at a point you just have to stop caring about it because you can't live unless you spend money on these things. So health insurance is a big thing right now. Things I wish I knew beforehand that I didn't, I'm just going to throw them in this video. If you're adding a baby to your flight internationally, if you wait until last minute, just like buying a last minute flight, it's going to be more expensive. And also, if you don't add your baby to your health insurance within a certain number of days from which the baby is born, then the baby doesn't get health insurance. Obviously, that's not a problem in Finland, but that's a problem in the US. So, another fun fact. If you come to the US and you study at a US university and you don't have health insurance, they will actually make you get health insurance through them. And from what I remember from when I was studying at Rutgers, which is the State University of New Jersey, it costs $700 or $800 a semester, not a year, a semester. And so you can pretty easily just go on any university website in the US and look at the cost breakdown of room and board, tuition, all that. And then, the crazier thing is bachelor's degrees are expensive, but per credit master's degrees are even more expensive. The weirder thing about that is nobody really cares that much if you have a master's degree when they're hiring you for different positions. So that's the other thing, why is it like this? It's pretty common for people to go straight from a PhD or straight from a bachelor's into a PhD. Whereas in Finland, I think because, the bachelor's degrees are 3 years and they have a master's degree tacked onto them for another 2 years. So it's 5 years total. Whereas the US bachelor's degrees are 4 years total. Master's degrees are also 2 years. And also, I think that with the PhD programs, they're also different lengths. In the US, the PhD programs can be, I think they're more 5 years usually. And in Finland, they're trying to do them in 3 years. Most people take longer than that. I'd say it's more 4 years. So it seems like there's always this random extra year that seems to get added on in the US for some reason. In general, I think the US is a much more competitive country. So what does this even look like? I mean, it's just okay, granted, I'm applying for PhD funding in Finland right now, and that's pretty competitive / impossible. I actually had a dream about that last night. That's how you know you really don't have a life anymore, when you're dreaming about PhD funding. Anyway, I also had a dream my baby was crawling, and I was like, this is way too soon for that. But anyway, so, yes, the PhD funding is it's hard to get in general. So, I mean, I think okay, so this is really where I'd have to like phone a friend. And I was talking to somebody on LinkedIn, my preferred messaging platform, about like what a PhD is like in the US. And it's like, you have all these different aspects like TAing, and like your salary is going to be pretty low, which I think that's a big difference too. Like a PhD salary in Europe is pretty competitive, whereas a PhD salary in the US is not at all competitive. And I was thinking about how PhD programs in each country tend to have international people coming into them. And I think the reason why that's happening is because it's a really easy way for that person to like get into that system, like that country system, and like stay in there. So it's like usually people from their own respective countries aren't going to go on to do PhDs, is kind of what that seems like. Like, I don't particularly want to do a PhD in the US, but also because I understand that education in the US is way more stressful than education in Finland is, which goes back to that point I talked about with like, being able to take an exam multiple times. But in general, like, yeah, the US is competitive. Here's another thing I'm going to say, because I told somebody this and they're like, that's whack. So at Rutgers, at least, and this is not every university, but at Rutgers, they have this whole grading on a curve thing. So, it happens where like the first 5 people get an A, the next 10 people get a B, the next 20 people get a C, and then a few other people fail if they like really didn't do anything. So this may not be like the most tasteful joke, but I'm like, obviously the A's go to all the Chinese kids. No, but like seriously, like these Chinese kids who like come from China to study at these US universities, who are like pretty serious students. Yeah, I was competing against them, and I'll be honest, they usually took the A's. They like swept the A's. One time I worked on a project with 2 like Chinese kids. Also, I'm not sure if people have heard this listening, the whole like FOB versus ABC, the fresh off the boat Chinese versus the American born Chinese. Yeah, some Korean girl I was friends with told me this. Anyway, but yes, these were the fresh off the boat ones, I guess. So like they were like literally from China. They weren't like born in the US. And I would watch the way that they would just like do each other's assignments for them depending on who needed help. And that was so like collectivist and like not individualistic like we are in the US, that I was so like, it was like such a big culture shock for me. And it's confusing to me because in a place like China where they're all very competitive, maybe they sort of feel like they have to like band together in the US to survive or something, and that's kind of why that happens. I don't know, but it was really an interesting experience. So yeah, the grading on a curve thing is incredibly stressful because it does not matter how hard you try or how good you actually are. If somebody next to you is still better than you, then you're going to get a worse grade. So, in general, I remember thinking, like, I said this verbally. I was like 21 years old, and I was like, I wish I could go to school forever and it just not be stressful. And that is exactly what I got by going to school in Finland. Like, it was so not stressful, because, like, well, first off, I was at a master's degree point. Like, there was nothing after that I needed to get into. Like, with, like, I did go to community college first. Community college was, like, way easier than, like, when I transferred to Rutgers. Rutgers was super stressful. Like, that was like one of the other periods of time in my life you can never pay me enough money to go back to, like 2015. At least it was 10 years ago. I'm kind of getting over it. But yeah, it was super stressful because I had scholarship money that was contingent upon keeping my GPA at a certain level. And I was like failing exams. And like I was going home and telling my family, like, I am failing. Like, I'm afraid I'm going to flunk out of Rutgers. And they were like, oh, you're exaggerating. I was like, no, I got a 23% out of 100 on an accounting exam. Like, I am going to fail. And so I had a W on my transcript. So you get a withdrawal. That doesn't look good, by the way. In Finland, if you withdraw from your classes, it's like nobody knows about it. And it's like not there. And it's like not a big deal. So I just think like the anxiety and the stress and the performance in the US, it's so competitive that like when you realize that people in other countries don't live like that and they have a higher standard of living than you, you're like, what am I doing here? And, this is the other thing now that I've been in my US apartment, like everything in here is so janky. Like these doors behind me don't shut properly. They keep coming off the track and like it doesn't work and that needs to get redone. And then my dishwasher like doesn't shut and like the cabinets in my kitchen don't shut properly. They do something like this. And I'm like, what is this shoddy work? Like in Finland, this would never happen. So it's just sort of like, I don't know. They really care a lot more about your comfort in Finland, I guess. And that extends to the education system. So yeah, it's really hard to keep this just specifically about education and not just about my experience overall. Also, it's super cool that in Finland you live in these bougie student apartments. I have never seen like such good infrastructure for students. Like, I know people are like, developing countries, like, everything's not that nice. Honestly, like, the conditions in which you live in the US a lot of times, unless you have like a ton of money, which most people don't, right? Like that's just the reality. Like people are living in what feels like developing world conditions. Like you should see some of these like college housing kind of like off-campus areas, even the on-campus areas. They're like ugly and you're paying so much money for them. Like it doesn't even make any sense. So that's the other thing that like okay, this is another good point. Like the living conditions around being a college student. Also, though, all right, so this is one where I'm going to have to vote in favor of Finland. However, in terms of like extracurricular activities, I have to vote in favor of the US. Okay, so let's start with the housing thing. Okay, so in Finland, you get like student housing, you live in an apartment, and you like rent from people. And in the US, that's not how that works. You get a room, and then there's a dining hall, and you basically get like fed by a buffet every single meal. Like you don't cook your own food, you don't do your own grocery shopping, you don't maintain your own household, you don't take out your own trash, like all of these things. And then you usually like share a bathroom. It's like a locker room style. So it's very like it's almost like way more communal in the US than it is in Finland. I personally hate that because first off, it's too expensive for what you get. Like you're literally paying like so much more money. Whereas like in Finland, like student stuff is subsidized because they like want you to be less stressed out while you're studying. It seems like in the US, they want you to be stressed out while you're studying so you'll graduate as quickly as possible and go into the workforce. I'd say in Finland, it's the opposite where they kind of make it so comfortable that like people don't really want to leave and then you have like perennial students like me. But no, that's not why. So, okay, there's that. Now, if we're going to talk about, like, extracurricular activities, like, one of the issues, and I've talked about this a lot, is, like, in Finland, it seems like the only thing to do for fun is, like, drinking. I know they have other things, but, like, I remember just constantly trying to, like, go to the guilds and be like, what interesting things do they have? And, it, like, none of it was, like, anything that I thought was interesting. So I personally like running, biking, swimming. I mostly did running club and swimming club at Rutgers, and like I enjoyed that a lot. That's probably like my only stress relief. And yeah, I wish they had those things in Finland. I did actually see like a running club kind of thing happening right before I left, like most recently. Obviously not super conducive to my current lifestyle, but I was like, where the heck was that thing while I was here? And apparently it wasn't really working because of COVID. I'm kind of confused as to why, since you usually run outside. Also, I'd be scared to run outside half the year in Finland. That was the other problem. But anyway, that's besides the point. Also, like all universities in the US have a pool, and in Finland that is not the case. So like these are things where I'm just kind of like, nah, the US is better. So it really like depends on what we're talking about and like what your preferences are and like what you value. But overall, I value not being stressed out. And this is why I feel very strongly about like trying to get my own child Finnish citizenship so that she has the opportunity to study in Finland instead of the US, because I just like don't think it's worth it here, to be honest with you. And it's like getting so expensive and like people can't even get jobs and you're like, what is this nonsense? So whatever. But yeah, it's pretty different. Overall, I'd say I'm really happy that I did do my bachelor's in the US, and I did it pretty cheaply because I went to community college first and I kept getting all these weird scholarships, and then I got to, go around the world. And it's only through my US education that I got to end up in Kyrgyzstan for free and Finland for free. Thank you, US taxpayer dollars, for those. Don't get me wrong, it was a ton of work to get those scholarships. I had to write essays and work with Crazy Arthur, as I call him. Hopefully he never sees this. It's the guy who like worked in the office of distinguished fellows, and like he has to like nitpick your essay and tell you like, and I quote, "This is just terrible writing," and then you have to edit it and whatever. So yeah, maybe that should be one of the services I include in this YouTube channel, is like editing people's competitive essays for like Boren and Fulbright scholarships. But I digress. Anyway, that's going to be everything I have for today, I guess, with this comparison video. I hope it was interesting to at least one person, because I think one of the questions I would get a lot was, like, people would be like, where are you from? In Finland. I'm like, the US. And they're like, why are you doing your master's here and not in the US? Isn't the education better there? I'm like, I'm here for free and I want a prestigious scholarship to be here, so yeah. Whatever. But yeah, I was thinking about how long it's going to take me to do my PhD at this point now that I have a child. I don't know. It's like a later problem. This was actually low-key always my plan. Well, I shouldn't say it was really my plan, because it still wasn't really like I was like trying to make it happen like this, but I did think about how, you know, being a PhD student and being a mother at the same time would be like a pretty like sweet ride. Again, this didn't really work out because I'm not funded, but whatever. Okay, well, anyway, that's everything I have, like, for real, and again, I hope this is interesting to at least one person. I'm going to try to do more comparisons between, like, Finland and the US. Maybe I'll talk about parenting in Finland versus the US next, because that one would be pretty whack, too. Yeah. Alright, well, thanks for your support of my channel. I'm going to try to keep it going, even though it's pretty rough for me right now, for so many reasons, but it's alright. Just keep on trucking. Until next time, bye.